This podcast is brought to you by UConnect, the creator of the first all-in-one virtual career center. Scale your impact and engage more students with a platform that puts all of your career resources in one place. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Career Everywhere podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Metzger, and for this episode, I want to share a recent conversation our VP of Marketing, Ashley Safransky, had in the Career Everywhere community about how to use video to engage Gen Z with career services. In this webinar recording, Ashley talks with Willie Wittezehler, the creative director at Roadtrip Nation. Roadtrip Nation is a nonprofit organization that provides resources and tools to help people explore careers and build lives around their passions. Roadtrip Nation has conducted over 3,500 video interviews with leaders from around the world who have turned their interests into careers. Willie shares why Gen Z prefers video, trends around video content and formats, how to create and promote video content so it resonates with Gen Z students, and more. Hope you enjoy the episode.
Thanks everyone for joining. My name's Ashley Safransky. I lead marketing here at UConnect. Appreciate everyone carving out time to join us for yet another webinar. I'm super excited to be joined by our featured guest today for the webinar. We have Willie Wittezehler. He's the creative director from Roadtrip Nation, who's going to share some great insight into how career services teams can better leverage video to engage Gen Z students. Roadtrip Nation is one of our headline partners for the new Candid Career Plus video module, which means we're pulling in several of their video playlists to make available to students. So, Willie, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Roadtrip Nation?
I am so excited to be here. Love this topic. This has been my whole professional career. And yeah, I'll introduce myself, do my best to do a rundown of Roadtrip Nation. I know it's a bit of a unique thing in the world of media, but my name's Willie and I'm the creative director. I was just telling Ashley that I have been at Roadtrip Nation for a little over 16 years now, essentially my whole adult life. And a better part of a decade there was spent actually in our bright green motorhomes, traveling the country behind the camera, working on our documentary series, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a second. But as Roadtrip Nation has kind of grown and expanded into different spaces, moving into this role of creative direction to really just focus on how we're showing up as a brand, what our kind of philosophy is, what our approach to storytelling is, and just to keep a consistency across all of our projects, because now we're doing anywhere from 8 to 10 of these road trips every year, each one becoming its own documentary special, which actually I'll pivot there. And I'm just going to pull up our website, which is everything I'm going to show you is available online. So if anyone wants to dig deeper on Roadtrip Nation, by all means, check out our website. But yeah, so Roadtrip Nation, I think most people know of it from our media and our broadcast side. So like I mentioned, our documentary series has been airing on public television for over 20 years now in nearly every PBS station across the country. But that's only one half of what we do. We are a media, documentary storytelling, career exploration company, but we're also an education company. And it's really those two sides that come together in a pretty unique way. So the road trips, each one, as I mentioned, is another team of what we call road trippers, a group of typically 3 folks who hit the road and interview people across the country about their lives and career journeys. And each one becomes its own documentary. So each one of these thumbnails is anywhere from a 1 to 4 hour documentary series that aired on public television. And each one tells a different story of either an industry in the sense of changing gears. This one's all about automotive technicians and mechanics, or people, that share a certain identity, like our Native American road trip or Being Free, which is formerly incarcerated road trip. Did a road trip all about community college pathways, one about first generation students, computer science, et cetera, et cetera. And just to give you a sense of what that really looks like is I'll just click into, say, a balanced equation. This was women in science themed road trip. And each time we'll select a team of road trippers. So in this case, it's, young women who are interested in careers in science, but maybe are looking for some more exposure, some more knowledge of what's out there for them, what's possible. And so they hit the road. Here you can see the route that this team took across the country. And they talk to all kinds of awesome, inspiring women in science, all different, entrepreneurs, or they went to NASA and interviewed a couple of engineers at NASA. And all of that content becomes the documentary special, a balanced equation, long form, it plays on TV. But also it gets split up into individual interview videos. So everyone that we meet on every one of these road trips gets an interview profile that feeds into this archive of now thousands and thousands of videos of people talking about their unique life and career paths. And so, as you can imagine, after 20 years of doing this, it's an incredibly diverse and representative archive of career stories. So, you can explore this, click in to find out about their stories. And each one is not only video based, but covers things like the milestones in their path, the education and, skills and certifications that they leverage to get where they are, descriptions of what their job really is, the interests that are combined under this, their recommended education, as well as, and this is really important to Roadtrip Nation, is how do we differentiate this from, say, the type of information you could find on someone's LinkedIn profile? And that's where we get into kind of the more human aspects of the journey and the career exploration. So like, what were the messages that you heard? In this case, this person was told to work in astronomy or physics, you need to get a PhD, to which they replied that, that wasn't necessarily true for them. They found examples and pathways to aerospace engineering without it. They also happen to be someone who had learning and attention issues. So he talks about his adjustment in his freshman year of college and things like that. All of this content is tagged with metadata and is arranged in a way that a young person can come to our library and our educational resources, and based on their interests, based on their needs, based on whether, for example, if they have learning and attention issues, they can find interviews from people like them.
Appreciate the thorough introduction, Willie. The content that you all are creating is incredible, which is why we're obviously ecstatic to have you all to pulling in a lot of those videos into the Candid Career Plus module. So just a quick bit of background. I know I mentioned it, but several of you know UConnect. We recently rolled out the new Candid Career Plus. After we acquired Candid Career back in 2022, we spent the last few years, of course, updating the product. But I think most importantly, we've spent time going out and, sourcing several fresh new content providers like Roadtrip Nation so that we could really boost or bolster up that video library with content that's really going to resonate for young people like Willie talked about. And, we did all of that. Obviously, video is just super critically important to any career services engagement strategy. So we're excited to be rolling that out. So I'm going to jump into the questions now. So I'm going to kick us off with the first one, Willie. What would you say are some of the key characteristics of Gen Z that may influence how they consume video content?
Yeah. Okay. So I think I want to start by maybe rattling off some of the more, I don't know if this will be obvious to everyone, but what I would consider obvious ones, or, if you were to Google this is what you'd see. And I'll just get through that because I don't want to skip over that stuff. It's valid to get to a point that in particular has really been a driving force for me. But those things to me are, everyone kind of hears or knows about the shortening of attention spans and, the need for short form engaging content, as well as the tendency to cater to mobile first. Most young people are engaging with video on mobile. Things like how interactive it is, abilities to comment, like, share. Those are all really key kind of traits of how young people are consuming video, as well as looking for representation of folks that have shared identities, shared values, shared interests. I think that's really central with how young people are consuming video now, is because there is so much out there that they kind of expect to have a choice of who the messenger is in the video content that they're looking at. In fact, that term messenger, I feel like I'm going to use that a lot over this hour. I'll come back to it. But anyways, the thing I really wanted to get to is an insight that I've really gleaned over the recent years that has become somewhat of a central driving force for me, which is, it's a simple thing, but really understanding that young people are using video-based platforms for searching and answering questions that they have. So similarly to how we all kind of ubiquitously use Google, you say, oh, Google it, young people are using Google as well, but they're using TikTok and YouTube for the same reason. They're asking questions there. If there's something that they want to learn about, they're going to videos to get those answers. And when I say that's become somewhat of a central driving force for Roadtrip Nation creatively, is every video that we produce, I think a great test against that concept and how it's executed is to just focus on what is the utility of this video to the audience? Like, what question is it answering? And then how is everything serving that question? How is the thumbnail serving that? How is making it clear what the purpose of this video is? How is the title making it clear? How is the content obviously going to satisfy that question that the user might have? So yeah, that idea that it may have been in past generations that you'd go to Google to ask a question, that more and more often people are now opening up TikTok to learn more about something. So yeah, I'll stop there. But there's obviously more that we'll get into.
I mean, you mentioned that, how it's changed over the last few years, or how maybe us, millennials may have approached, getting questions answered. Yeah. But you all have been doing video, like really focused on videos for probably the entirety of Roadtrip Nation's existence. So any like key themes or, just how have things shifted from the previous generation, or at least in the last few years? And how have you all adapted in particular?
I think the biggest thing I would say is audiences have become more and more, young audiences have become more and more media savvy. They know all the tactics of marketing, for example, or the high alert for corporate messaging or propaganda or whatever it might be. They know exactly how video editing works and even have firsthand experience in that. And or it's pretty common a young person has some experience creating content themselves. And I think that translates into an audience that in some ways is, I guess in the negative light, I would say like highly skeptical. Or this is what I always say to people: Gen Z's BS radar is really high. They know when something's off and they'll leave quickly. And because of that, something else you'll hear a lot is that authenticity is so important. And to me, that's what that really means, is that this is a generation that can kind of see through your intentions. And they're really looking for kind of quote unquote real people. When they go online and they go to videos, they're kind of scanning for like, well, where's this authentic? Who is authentically representing this? I want to hear it from the source. I don't want something that's been kind of filtered or translated or edited. And while maybe all of that sounds a little bit scary, I don't think that it should be. Because to me, it means that if you're going to be creating content, all you have to do is be yourself. And I don't know if I'm being too like rose-colored glasses with that, but I think the more authentically you can show up, and here's where I'll loop back to that term of the messenger. It really becomes about like, who's the right messenger for this message? Who can represent this authentically? Because that cuts right through it. That's the shortcut. But yeah, I think that's the thing that's really changed. Even when I think about millennial content in the early 2010s, I think that there was a higher degree of sort of performative media out there. And more it seems like, hey, you got to strip it down. You have to be real. And the more authentic you are, the better.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I think a good kind of segue into my next question. I think you described that really well. So in terms of the content itself, so actual video content, do you find, or do you have an opinion about specific type of content that seems to resonate most with Gen Z? So like there's interview driven, day in the life, highlight reels, and just in the terms, in the context of highlighting career pathways or, different industries, et cetera.
Yeah, I can definitely speak to some format types, at least as it relates to Roadtrip Nation, because we've explored in some ways our YouTube channel is kind of our R&D department, and we have explored quite a bit of different sort of formats for exactly that purpose. It's like, let's see what is or isn't resonating. And I can list off a couple of specific types, but let me back up because I also wanted to make sure and speak to video length. And I think this might be a good place to sneak that conversation in. But remind me if I don't get to it. I'll come back to maybe call out some of those specific video types that you were asking about. But the big kind of headline I wanted to say on this topic is that long form video is not dead. There's sort of this like prevailing wisdom that it's got to be short. I talked about attention spans shortening, and that's all based in some very valid and important considerations. But there is a lot of long form video doing really well with young people. So for example, every social platform has like a live stream function now. And that's kind of to replicate the success of platforms like Twitch, where people are live streaming sometimes for upwards of 5, 6, 8 hours a day. And young people are tuning in and they're hanging out with this person. I mean, I don't know how familiar this audience may or may not be with like Twitch style live streams, but literally young audiences will find a streamer that they like and they will watch that person play a video game for 2 hours while they talk about it. Or they'll watch that person browse the internet and watch videos. And going back to the interactive piece, in the chat, they'll be saying, oh, you got to check out this video or whatever. And then they'll watch that person watch that video. And so there is this like world of long form content that's really connecting with young people. The key is that when a young viewer finds the niche or that interest area that they are really into, then they're willing to deep dive. They're willing to spend some time there. And so going back to this idea of where does this idea of it's got to be short, it's got to like appeal to a short attention span thing, where does that come from? To me, short form is important for two things. One, for getting a viewer's attention in the first place. I talked about like driving young viewers to that place where they're willing to deep dive. They can't start there. So that short form is a really important piece to just like catching their attention, showing them that this is a channel or a content creator or a brand that is really aligned to who they are in a first impression kind of way. The other thing that short form is really important to is in the use cases where you want a young person consuming multiple videos. So if the idea is that they swipe through 10 videos, those videos better be 30 seconds, like that's about as long as you're going to get if you're hoping for them to be like, oh, I'm interested enough to watch another. And I know there's plenty of platforms or places where that's the goal, is you want them to spend some time exploring a library. And so I think it's worth maybe calling out that like on social media, on the internet, the strategy is whether it's short form ads that play at the beginning of a video or YouTube Reels or Instagram stories, often that's the attention grabber to get to that deeper thing, to send somebody to a more long form video. In the case of Roadtrip Nation, we'll use an Instagram story to catch someone's attention, to show them, hey, there's a documentary about women in science. And if the right person gets that message, they'll click to it, and then maybe they'll stick around for the half-hour thing. And so it's that relationship between short and long form that I think is really important. As well as kind of even within our interview archive, that visual I was showing earlier of interviews that we've done over the years, our approach there is the first video that we want a user to watch is a 30 to 60 second just quick piece of advice from this person. And the idea is if they like what that person's saying, or if they like something about this person as a messenger, then they'll watch more. And we have more. We have videos on each of their day in the life of their job. We have videos on them speaking to their skills and the education path that was necessary to get to their job. Then we also have full-length interviews that are, for us, typically 8 to 10 minutes long. But we don't start there. We start them with that nice little pithy piece of advice to grab their attention. And if they are interested, then there's places for them to go to dig deep. But yeah, okay. And so let me circle back and maybe get a little bit more specific about some format types. We, especially on our YouTube side, have leaned into places where there's a host or somebody who's, whether you call it formally a host or not, the most important thing is when you meet young people where they're at on social media platforms, especially, they're very used to someone speaking directly to them. So having somebody who's looking down the lens saying, hi, this is who I am, this is what we're about to do, is really important. On our broadcast side, on our documentary side, that's not exactly what we've been doing. We've taken a more traditional documentary approach there, but we've seen the engagement rise in the cases where on YouTube, at least, we have somebody there to welcome the viewers and ultimately develop that sense of trust that this is a trusted guide, again, a trusted messenger for them, as well as eventually, ideally, a parasocial relationship there. This is somebody that I feel like kind of has my best interest in mind. I want to learn from, and I'll stick around to kind of see where they go and what their adventures take them. On the educational side, a couple other formats. The day in the life video has become probably the most important kind of excerpt we cut from every interview that we do. So we'll have those long form interviews where we'll talk about their life path, their career journey, etc. And we'll also cut out a 2 to 3 minute day in the life. And that's another format that we found a lot of users who are coming to these resources to just learn about a career. If they see these options, they're going to the day in the life because that gets to the point of like, well, what is it really like to do this job? And again, if they like that, then maybe they'll go on to see some more. So those are a couple that I would call out there that have worked for Roadtrip Nation. Going back to my earlier point about really asking the question of like, what is the utility of each video that we make? I think while this isn't necessarily something we do, I would just say, broadly speaking, any kind of like tutorial or how to or just skill building video resource, those drive a lot of engagement because remembering that a young person is often coming to video to learn something. If you can promise some sort of value proposition, if you watch this, you're going to learn that, the likelihood of it being an engaging video for young people just goes way up.
Yeah, thank you for you've covered a couple of my questions there. So appreciate you giving all of that insight. I think knowing like a lot of or most career centers are offering a lot of different resources to their students. So there's job boards and mentor platforms and blogs and articles and resume advice and all of this stuff. Why is video both like why is it well suited to really support career exploration, and why should video be a key part of every career center's strategy?
Yeah, I think that I'll speak to two things. I want to start with maybe elaborating on what I was saying when I was talking about the messenger. So I think the key word here about why video is so important and so valuable is humanization. And it's really all about the messenger, meaning the person that's on camera providing the message. Young people want to see and feel who is giving the information. And they want that info coming from somebody that they feel like they can trust and somebody that they think is cool and somebody that they think is relatable or somebody that they see themselves in, et cetera. And I think video is kind of the quickest way to give somebody a sense of who that messenger is. Because in many ways, it's not about the message as much as it's about the messenger. So for example, I'm sure people watching this can relate. A career counselor can say the exact same thing as, earlier I was talking about a Twitch streamer. Like maybe they say the exact same thing as this Twitch streamer says, but a young person who's interested in gaming, they'll probably tune out the counselor. But if they hear the gaming influencer say it, then it's like gospel to them. I can't tell you how many times we've been on the road, we've interviewed somebody who's inspiring and motivational and so interesting and had these really great conversations with our road trippers. And then they turn to me behind the camera and they say like, man, I wish my kids would listen to me, or I wish my kids would be as interested in me as you guys are. And it's just so funny to me because it's like, yeah, your kids, they need a different messenger. You probably have exactly what they need to hear, but sometimes it's hard for them to hear it from their parents. So I just wanted to call out that element of video, which is like that finding the right people to deliver the message. That's kind of one of the key pieces is that young people can see that. Beyond that, obviously visually engaging, it's like an efficient way to communicate ideas. It's really versatile, etc. But the other point I wanted to come around why video is so well suited to kind of provide this type of insight and exposure is something I talk about all the time at Roadtrip Nation, which is being really intentional about when and where you're appealing to both somebody's head and their heart. And what I mean by that is providing information and data and answering those very direct questions that a young person might have about a career. How much am I going to make? Like, how high of a degree do I need? That type of information, as well as providing motivation and empowerment and inspiration. And that's where the role modeling comes in. It's like, oh, wow, like the difference between, oh, this is what a job as an engineer at NASA looks like, and a young woman finding another woman who looks like her, or maybe shares some similarities in their background, and saying, wow, they did it, so can I. And so I think video is another really powerful way to do that. And at Roadtrip Nation, we constantly are striving to make videos that are pretty balanced in both of those ways, that we're providing some of that tactile, inspiration. To be totally candid, we lean a little heavier on the inspiration. It's more of our sweet spot. And if you rewind the clock to some earlier Roadtrip Nation content, it might be 100% on that side, if we're being completely honest. And we've been trying to balance that out a little bit more. And then I start to think about, how do these tools show up? You mentioned all the different tools that career centers and career services have now. And I think that it applies there too. It's like if the video is there more to spark imagination, to empower somebody, how are you also maybe outside of that or with other tools supporting that head side and providing the data and the information that they want to? Because ultimately it's about how you appeal to both those things in a sort of balanced way. And I know that's a bit of a, I guess, obtuse answer to your question, but video in particular, I think is particularly suited to, at the very least, bring that heart piece, because that's where they see the messenger that they can connect with, or they can connect with someone on a human level. So
yeah, I want to go back to that point that you made just about having content that's for them and feels for them and providing that inspiration. And, a shameless plug. And those on the call who use the Virtual Career Center can know what we're talking about, where, the ability to curate content and create communities or spaces for students and then have that content that is for those students based on their interests or identities or academic pursuits is just super important. And then having the content teed up for them so they watch a video and their interest is sparked and now they can dig deeper. Now they're looking at, jobs or internships or labor market data or whatever. So I wanted to drive that point home. And you kind of started on the topic of like the content itself. And I'm curious if you can just share a little bit about like, how are you all identifying topics, what you're focusing on and what the subject of different videos will be and how you make those decisions?
That's foundational and such a key jumping off point. I think that one tool I'll mention is keyword research. For anyone on the call who's not familiar, I probably wouldn't be that great of a resource for really breaking that down for you. I would say Google articles about keyword research. There's a lot of tools out there, but it's basically behind the scenes analytics, ways to learn about what popular search items are, what types of phrases people are putting into the YouTube search, etc. Anytime we are going to create another video or do another topical road trip, we spend a lot of time there learning about the demographics of the audience, the target audience, like what's on their minds, what are they searching for? And then you could also see what else is out there, looking at competitors, so to speak, or what existing media is out there. And honestly, some of it's pretty surface level. If you look up articles about keyword research, it would probably even say, find similarly topic videos to what you're looking into making and look at the engagement. How many comments does it have? What kind of likes? Like who's interacting with it? But a lot of that starts there, that sort of internet CSI work to just like get a sense of where the conversations are. I'd also say if you have access to any kind of user testing, we really lean on that at Roadtrip Nation. We use usertesting.com weekly for different mini tests of things, or even better, youth focus groups. We have teachers across the country and we'll often engage with them, incentivize students with gift cards or swag or whatever it might be to get just some young people reacting to an idea or whatever it may be. And I know for a lot of people who are listening to this probably have direct access to young people and just don't underestimate the power of that. And don't underestimate the power of like anecdotal evidence for insights into trends too. Outside of our documentaries, we do a lot of event tours, screening events. So we're constantly at schools. And so much of our insights kind of comes from that sort of finger on the pulse of like what we consistently hear from young people about what they're interested in, what kind of questions they're asking us, that types of thing. I talked about keyword research on the front end. On the back end, Google Analytics or just engagement metrics, period, are such a critical flag. So there's a lot of tools there too. Google Analytics, YouTube Analytics, just the behind the scenes on our own website. We could see what's being watched, how long it's being watched for, by which demographics, and that's always super informative. So I think it's some amalgamation of all of that that sort of rises these topics to the fore, as well as since we have this awesomely robust kind of career representative archive, we have spreadsheets that are like, here's the careers we don't have. Here's some of the top growth industries in the country, and we only have 2 careers there. So like those things inform us too. We're like, this summer, we're about to launch a road trip all about nursing. So 3 young aspiring nurses are going to go out and interview nurses across the country. Because that was one of the places we're like, wow, we only have a handful of nurses in our archive, but this is a huge sector, healthcare in general, but even specifically that career path. So things like that are also informing the way we collect our content.
Cool. Super helpful.
Hey, friend, if you're enjoying this podcast, I think you'd really like the Career Everywhere community. The Career Everywhere community is a digital space for career leaders like you to learn from each other, collaborate, and share best practices around your work. And the best part, it's totally free to join. Join over 1,000 other career leaders and sign up today at careereverywhere.com/community.
Any recommendations for how career teams in particular can either start doing, more incorporation of video into their content strategy to engage students?
I'd go back to the first thing I was saying early on in this conversation about the relationship between short and long form. I think that in that case, really start on that short form, short, engaging content to capture attention quickly, and using that as sort of the hook to find what is or isn't resonating before you kind of dive deeper. And I suppose I'm talking to two potential use cases at once here, folks who are just trying to incorporate existing video versus, I don't know if there's people on the call who are interested in or who are already creating their own content or interested in creating their own content. But I guess regardless, another thing to consider is working with, I'll use the term influencers, even though I'd even kind of bake in the idea of a micro influencer. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody with 1 million subscribers. Going back to the sort of niche interest areas, it's like, who are the folks who are doing this already, or maybe even within your community have a sort of like presence there, and how can you collaborate with them? Because that goes back to that messengers piece. It's like thinking about whether you yourself are the right person to share this, or if there's someone else out there that's more organically suited. At the inception of every project for Roadtrip Nation, we talk about who the target audience is, what the key messages of this project are, and then the next step is, and who are the people who can deliver that message organically. We don't want anyone kind of putting on a front or a performance. Who are the folks who are actually at the sort of intersection of this topic and can represent it authentically. And so I'd say for anybody out there trying to incorporate video, it's the same question. It's like, who's the right messenger for the message that I'm trying to pass on, and how can I kind of integrate with them? And I guess the last thing I would say, this is maybe a little less tactile, is you're kind of competing against algorithms. What I mean by that is young people are so used to algorithms doing two things: getting to know who they are and what they're interested in, and then connecting them with the exact right content for them. That's why TikTok is popular, because it's got a really great algorithm. Pretty quickly, it can figure out what you do or don't like, and then it starts sending you the more of the stuff you like. And if you keep that in mind, I think of career services as potentially like a human algorithm in a sense, or I think of Roadtrip Nation that way as well, which is like, how can you get to know your student and then connect them to the exact thing that they need to hear? And keep in mind that I keep kind of beating this drum, that messengers piece, where it's like, maybe you know exactly what this young person needs to hear, but are you the right person to deliver that message? Or is there someone else out there doing it? Is there an influencer in the space? Is there a YouTuber or a TikTok presence that's like diving deep in that industry or exploring what that career looks like? And can you send it to them? That's the other thing that young people are so used to is, hey, check out this video. And I think that that's maybe even the most base level way to start incorporating video, is just to take on that approach of like, you should watch this. That is just so common in the day-to-day and friends and whatever, people texting back and forth like, hey, this made me think of you, or you might be interested in that. So how can you kind of do what the algorithm does so well and that young people are so used to, which is like, gather some inputs from them. What are their interests? What are their questions? What are their hurdles? And maybe there's content out there that you can connect them with. And, you mentioned that there's Roadtrip Nation content being integrated into your tools and platforms. And that's a great library to start with, is like just looking through what career representation in there, what types of backgrounds, what types of folks are in there. And the better you sort of know that, maybe the more kind of potential options you'll have in your back pocket to be like, hey, after our conversation, I realize you should check this out. And if that's too kind of if that's more in depth than you're able to go, then obviously it's looking for those tools and platforms where a young person can do that themselves. I mean, that's the intention with the Roadtrip Nation website, or with so many of these tools, is that there is some sort of user identification up front that then connects them with the right content. But yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I think just circling back to, you mentioned the UConnect platform and Canada Career in particular. And I love that career services teams being like the human algorithm. I think definitely a lot of our partners are taking advantage of, tagging content, publishing videos to specific communities or spaces where, again, students go to, and they're getting really what feels like curated or customized content and resources based on, their own personal backgrounds and interests. So super helpful. Do you all find, something you said made me think about like this idea of a messenger. And there are so many career influencers or career champions across a campus. So there's faculty and staff and academic advisors. And then there's alumni and parents are, obviously really large, significant career influencers. Do you all are you creating content specifically for those audiences in particular? Or do you have advice for how career teams should be thinking about getting any video content in the hands or on the screens really of those career influencers?
Yeah, I think that Roadtrip Nation is almost always kind of speaking to two audiences at the same time. So there's this sort of inherent almost contradiction in our model where we're making content for young people, but we're putting it on public television where young people are not watching it. And with that in mind, we know that there's an ecosystem of support and community around young people, and that those folks are actually the shepherds for getting this content to the right people. So that would be educators and administration, or even like you mentioned, parents, home networks, as well as policymakers, et cetera. And while we make content that's directed primarily at that youth audience, secondarily, we're fully aware that it's not going to get to them without networks like yours and people in these spaces that see the relevance of it and get it to the right young person. And outside of that, to answer one of your questions, yes, we've actually created quite a bit of content that is directly for the educator audience too. So if you go on our website, you could view all documentaries. Our most recent 2 documentaries were road trips with teachers on the road. So it wasn't even young people talking to other people about their careers. It was teachers talking with other types of kind of rock star educators and people within the education space about conversations about family and community engagement and education, entrepreneurship and innovation and whole child education and all these things that are kind of on their mind and swirling in their lives. And so these teachers, these road trippers in this sense, were relatively early in their career, but similarly, they were just as invested and excited about hitting the road to have these conversations with different people in the education space. And so, yeah, I would definitely flag for that secondary audience to look at, they're called Education's Future. You'll see the 2 documentaries that we just released this year. They're at the top of the list right now because they're hot off the press, as well as I'd say subscribing to Roadtrip Nation's newsletter, because that newsletter audience is that sort of stakeholder educator audience for us. It's not where we speak directly to young people. And so that's another place to kind of stay up to date with what we're making. But yeah, I think that kind of answers your question.
Awesome. And there's a question in there, and I think the question that I'm going to ask will kind of address this a bit too, but how do you, Willie, as a creative director, who's, you've presumably produced hundreds, maybe more, thousands, maybe of video interviews, how do you think about, pulling out a compelling story out of an interview? And broadly, what tips or tricks do you recommend to any career leaders or career teams, those who may want to create their own video content for their students?
Specifically to the interview point, yes, that has been the craft of Roadtrip Nation for many years. So I could speak for an hour about that. But to give you a couple of bullet points, a lot of the work starts before you hit record. And that work is relationship development. It's anybody who's going to be involved. It's really bringing them into the process so that they're truly kind of invested in it. They understand what it's about. They understand what their role is in this. And going back to my piece about authenticity, we will explicitly say to every road tripper, to every interviewee that we meet, kind of beat this drum of, you're a part of this because of exactly who you are. You do not need to play a certain role for us or say something that you maybe, because people will often intuit oh, what do they want from me? What do they want me to say? And our whole kind of art form has become stripping that away and be no. Be yourself truly. Because I think if we can capture an authentic moment here, an authentic bit of expression, and translate that to a viewer, that's when we feel like we've been really successful. And so a lot of that work starts, like I said, in pre-production, in the development of a relationship, and even in just establishing a rapport that will translate to just kind of an environment of comfort once you're on camera. And then once you're actually sitting down with somebody, I think you have to be really aware of the energy that you're bringing, and that if you want them to, in the case of Roadtrip Nation, to share personal details and to get real with you, or maybe even like get vulnerable and emotional, then you have to do that too. It's really that simple. And so we always start our interviews with the interviewer, who, in the case of Roadtrip Nation, is also on camera. That's the road tripper. They're on camera. We always start with them doing a really kind of deep introduction of who they are, why they're doing this interview, what it means to them, and really spending a couple minutes there. And I've seen it 100 times. We'll sit down with a CEO or somebody at, a corporation or whatever it might be. And maybe they'll sit down thinking, okay, I'm going to do my spiel. And once they're sitting down with a real person, and often in our case, a real young person who's looking for guidance and advice, and they understand like, oh, this person's like actually wants something, I can actually offer something valuable to them. You see the whole demeanor change. But that can't just be up front. That's in throughout the conversation. How are you showing up? What kind of energy are you giving them? Because people are going to reflect that. So throughout the conversation, our road trippers, our interviewers, are consistently kind of bringing them their whole selves to the conversation. So, for example, instead of asking a question like, did you have a backup plan? Maybe you'll get an interesting answer to a question like that. We would encourage the road trippers to explain why they're asking that. So maybe it's, right now I'm really worried this isn't going to work out for me, or I'm about to graduate with this degree and I'm not even sure anymore if that's what I really want to do. And I'm panicking because I don't have a backup plan. Like, were you ever in a situation like that? Or did you have a backup plan? And if you think about the difference in the responses that you would get to those two questions, I literally give an example like that to every team of road trippers that hits the road for us. Because one, I want this conversation to be valuable to them. I want it to be meaningful for them. And the more you bring yourself to a conversation, the more catered and interesting and impactful this conversation will be for you. But I also get them bought in on the fact that specificity and that depth is going to kind of give a deeper, better impact to everyone who comes in contact with this content. So the more real you can get with somebody in the moment, the more that impact will translate to a viewer. And that's kind of ultimately, when I say upfront, getting people bought into what you're doing, they should know and understand that that's the goal. Is like what we're about to capture here. At times, it might feel a little messy. It might feel a little vulnerable. But when we do that, then it's going to help more people who feel similar to you or look up to you or see themselves in you. And if everybody understands that that's the mission, then they can show up in that way once the camera's rolling, as well as, like I said, if they feel a deep sense of kind of connection and trust with the crew. Because that's the other thing is like, there can be a lot of skepticism of like, how are you going to use my story? And so we really try to bring people into the process and truly collaborate with young people, because to center youth voices in media or to make youth content, you can't be kind of helicoptering in from the outside and telling their stories. Like, they have to be partners in that. And the more that you could just sort of bring that approach into the pre-production, the better the product becomes, because they'll be bought into the mission and they'll be ready and they'll see their role in it. And then you'll come out the other end with a more kind of authentically youth-centered product.
Amazing advice. And I want to call out, we have Meredith on my team who hosts and produces our Career Everywhere podcast too.
Cool.
She's a fantastic interviewer and she's really digging your advice. So thanks for sharing all of that. I do want to take just a quick moment to once again reiterate that we're super pumped to have Roadtrip Nation as one of several content providers in the new Candid Career Plus. Thousands of new videos that have been vetted and curated for career services to share with students, faculty, staff, etc. So whether you're a current Candid Career Plus user or not, if you're interested in just continuing the conversation about how or ways to leverage video as part of career services strategy, we would love to follow up with you. So I just dropped a link to a form in the chat. If everyone could just kindly fill it out one way or another, it just helps us know like how to follow up with you or if we should follow up with you. I would be so appreciative. So while you all do that, I'm going to jump into the first question. And once again, folks, feel free to submit questions. Amy has a great question. I'm just going to read it verbatim here. I'm interested in creating video content and I'm wondering how to interest students in a 30-second-ish video. Also, how can I make the video interesting and professional without looking hokey? And how can I teach some skills without it being boring? Good question.
Nice. Okay, I want to start with the hokey piece, because I think that one thing that's really important to understand earlier when I was talking about authenticity is there's a really high degree of grace around kind of production value, I feel like, with youth audiences. And in some ways, something that's a little bit more rough around the edges, but more authentic is actually going to play a lot better than somebody kind of trying to be professional and falling short. And that's kind of where I was going earlier when I was talking about like showing up and being yourself. That includes like, I don't know what I'm doing or whatever. That includes like transparently just like screen recording a Zoom because that's the technology that you have available to you. I think that when I was saying the media savvy young people, they can pick up on all that context pretty quickly and honestly are pretty forgiving because they're so used to seeing things in so many different ways. The one kind of disclaimer I would add in there though is audio quality. If your visual isn't great, if you're not a professional cinematographer, if you don't have a great camera, there's a lot of grace, as I said. If the audio is bad, that's really difficult to engage with. And so whether that means buying audio equipment, getting a good microphone, or at the very least, just like I'm doing now, getting to a quiet space, filming indoors over outdoors, then I'd say it's really key because that's probably a quicker turnoff just on the production quality side. But even on the visual side, if you don't have professional lighting, obviously there's really accessible kind of ring lights and things like that you can get. Or right now, there's a window behind my computer. And if you can put a window in front of your face, like that actually natural lighting gives really even well-lit spaces. But yeah, in terms of the short form and hooking people in, gosh, not to be like super repetitive, but just to reinforce what I was saying earlier about starting with what question is this answering and just making sure it's really clear to the audience that they're going to get this question answered to them with this video. And you can use things like the video title, the thumbnail, whatever it is, to just make that value proposition really clear. Because you always want to start with appealing to that user need. So if you have the sense that they need exposure to more careers, for example, the title can be called like, learn about what's out there or learn about careers in your community or something in some way to quickly just show this is what you're going to learn if you hit play on this. But then secondarily, it's really about establishing a relationship of like, I'm a trusted messenger, whether that I is a brand or an individual or whatever it is. So for Roadtrip Nation, like we'll often lead with trying to figure out what to do with your life. And I won't actually say we're a trusted messenger, but I'll say we've been on the road interviewing thousands of people about their lives and career paths. And that is the bona fides that say like, oh, that's why I should listen to them. I am trying to figure out what to do with my life. They seem to have some insight, so I'll stick around and learn from them. So how can you kind of recreate that maybe every time? Like, what is this video trying to accomplish? How do I make sure that the viewer understands what they're going to learn from this? And then prove to them that this is a place that's going to give them some good information and insight on that. And that's going to look different, obviously, every video. And, you know, I've done this so much that it's like the success rate kind of comes and goes. Sometimes it hits a little bit harder than others. And that's the nature of this sort of transient landscape as well. And like I said, we use YouTube as an R&D department. And there's a lot of that too, is just trying different things and seeing what sticks and what doesn't. And there's plenty of videos that we put out in the last year that have 45 views on them or something. And it's like, oh, okay, learning from that. And then, like I said, there's a video that we put out a couple weeks ago that has 400,000 views. And it's like, okay, let's talk about what happened there, you know? And that's just part of it, is starting to make stuff and see what doesn't resonate.
Yeah. And I think fortunately for our career services teams, they have access to a lot of students. And I know many employ student ambassadors or student workers, and that feedback loop can be relatively quickly on the different videos. You were talking about the audio quality. And so there's a question related to that. Do you typically incorporate a transcription option or have options to translate content to other languages?
Yes, 100%. Everything has closed caption files on it. A lot of public platforms do that automatically. The quality can vary. On our website, we do that on our own. And only recently, though, literally in this last year, have we started to engage organizations that can do translations and can put this in multiple languages. It's been more and more a call with different partners of ours. And so our documentaries going forward are going to have that option. At the very least, I think we'll have Spanish subtitles, but we're kind of baking it into the funding up front now to like engage those services. So I think existing on our website, everything is closed captioned in English at least. And going forward, we're trying to get translations incorporated outside of a couple of small cases where the theme in particular was kind of targeted at a certain audience where we also got those translated.
There's a question about best place to start for teams that have less marketing and communication teams support. So like a central marketing communications office, or perhaps they don't have a marketing or comms person on staff. Where's like maybe just give some advice for like just getting started when you have very little resources or support from someone who you may typically think would own kind of like video creation?
Good question. I think that a couple things that come to mind are how you might be able to empower youth created content. That's something that we have really started to focus energy on, kind of cracking that nut. Roadtrip Nation has a 30 plus person video production department now. It's super robust, but even still, there's only so many crews we could send out around the country to make these documentaries. And because of that, we've started engaging on a couple of programs specifically about empowering young people to create their own interview content. And I think a couple key pieces there, if you were to go that route of like, how might I incentivize young people to start talking about these things or creating videos about these things, that incentive piece is really key. So for us, it's really focusing on what's the value exchange here. You definitely can't enter a conversation with a young person in some sort of an entitled way to say like, tell us your story or let us capture your story. What's in it for them? And I think that there's the sort of intangibles of, if you're going to do an interview, you're going to learn from this, and that's definitely value. But then there's the more tangibles of financial compensation, et cetera. And so, for example, right now in Pittsburgh, we have a couple hundred young people through different summer programs who are getting gift cards for doing interviews in their local communities with professionals. And because these young people vary in their own abilities and access to media, we're not expecting them to create highly produced interview videos, but instead we're having them all record selfie videos of their reflections after the interview. So you'll see a picture of who they interviewed, that selfie of them, and then you'll hear them talk about what they learned, what some of the skills they felt like this person said were most important for their job, et cetera. And like I said, it's incentivized through both the value of the experience and a gift card. And to us, that's been our approach for how we might be able to scale up kind of Roadtrip Nation in different ways. And I think maybe that could translate to what you all are getting at of like, hey, if we aren't going to be the video department ourselves, but we want to make video, maybe that's a realm to explore, is like ways to engage young people, because that's also a shortcut to getting some real authentic youth relevant media.
Yes, love that and totally agree with that. I'm going to end with this question and see if you can sneak in a couple of insights. It's around different platforms. So the question is, do you edit your videos different for different platforms? For example, if you are uploading directly to your website versus LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, like, do you have any just quick thoughts around types of videos or length or formats for different platforms? It's probably a big question, but
the short answer is yes, 100% yes. From beginning to end, you create differently for nearly every platform. And it really starts with learning best practices of each and understanding user behaviors on each and just translating that into the videos you're producing. So yeah, I can't really go into depth in the last minute on each one, but yeah, maybe that is a bit of a universal kind of takeaway here is when you're attempting to meet young people where they are, whether that's a specific platform or an interest area or a topic that they're trying to talk about, the more you can get to know how that works and how they're engaging in those spaces, the more you can cater content that fits it. And to me, I guess to end where I began, the key component in that is the messenger. So who's the right person on YouTube that can speak to this? Who's the right person on TikTok who could speak to this organically? Because trying to force something that is the shape of a square into a circle over here, these young people are very media savvy and they can see what you're trying to do. So it really, for me, is backwards engineering. Where is this happening organically? Who can represent this authentically? And how do we work with them to just align the messaging that we're hoping to promote and get some content created in that area?
Amazing. Right on time. Thanks for sneaking in those insights. Willie, thank you so much for joining us. There's, lots of great comments just about appreciation for all of the advice and insight that you provided. So thanks again. Love the work that you all are doing at Roadtrip Nation. Excited to be partners. And Yeah, I hope you have a fantastic week, Willie, and our audience. Hope you have a great rest of June too.
That's all for this episode of Career Everywhere. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to hit subscribe and rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.